Test. What is up, everyone? It's Thomas with Real Broker here in St. Augustine, Florida, coming at you live every Wednesday at 8 p.m., going over the market stats, the news you need to know about, everything about buying, selling, or investing here in Northeastern Florida, and we're also doing a Q&A. So if you have any questions while I'm covering anything here on the live stream, or if you have any questions about a certain area that you're living in or interested in, go ahead and throw them in the comments below. I try to answer everything live, and if you leave a comment, if you're watching the replay, I try to come back and answer all of those questions. So, like we do every single week, we start out with the market stats, and then we go on to the news, and then the news starts as like the national news, then the Florida news, and then the local news, just so it's kind of gives you the full picture of where we're heading with a lot of this information, so that you can be as educated and informed as possible of what's going on here locally, but also nationally in the real estate market. So let's go ahead and take a look at some data. And I was actually a little late hopping on here because I was just kind of poking at something. But I'll show you. I'll show you what I was taking a look at, and let me know what you guys think in the comments below of kind of what I was just looking at this, just kind of get my thoughts gathered on this. And I wasn't going to cover this today, but active inventory is something that we've been watching, right? Because as you can see, we have more homes for sale, right, than we did prior to the pandemic. And that is something that could signify a lot of issues for our market, right, in terms of price declines, in terms of not being able to sell your house. The positive of that is if you're a buyer, and you were a buyer during this time, you remember how much it sucked. So now we're back in this area where it's a little bit different. Now, this is hard to really get a good accounting for because you got to think there's been so much new construction that's built here in our area. I want to know, I'd probably say a quarter of these active listings are probably just new construction alone. So, and not saying there wasn't new construction here, but I just don't think it was at nearly the same level of what we have now. But the interesting thing that I wanted to point out on this, and I don't exactly have a great thought on this yet, or an educated thought, let's just say, but if you can see over here my cursor, May of 2025, we're at 12,203 active listings, and this is really a climb of listings, right? And February of 2022 is when we saw the lowest point, and then interest rates changed. I can show mortgage rates here. Interest rates began to start creeping up, right? And with that, our inventory, so mortgage rates are right here. With that, our mortgage or our active inventory began creeping up. So it was really what we wanted, right? We wanted the market to slow down. This was not sustainable. It was not a fun time in real estate for pretty much anyone unless you were selling a house. But most people selling a house also had to buy a house. So whatever profits they made on the sale, they probably threw it right back into the next buy. So, but the continuing issue, right, is like, okay, I'm going to take mortgage rates away, is, okay, active inventory keeps climbing, and that's been something that we've been worried about, right? And you can see that there's always a valley, right, of inventory. A lot of people don't want to list their homes during the holidays, right? And we always see this kind of steep decline. This is February, but December here, and this is obviously anomaly years. So 2020, 2021, they don't really count. But you can see December in 2019, December in 2018, and December in 2017. So it's always marked with a decline towards the end of the year. But what I wanted to see is, because I noticed that the peak was here in May in terms of how many active listings that we have, and I was just looking and I'm like, okay, is that repeated in the previous years, right? So I went back to 2024. May is actually right here, so it wasn't near the peak. Really, we were on the climb up. Now, could that be outside factors considering we were recovering from the pandemic in terms of the low lows? 100%. So not exactly the best indicator, but you can see May, June, July, August, it all starts to stay. September, October, listings climb even to the highest point in October, and then they start to drop off here. But we had our drop off in May, right? Whereas normally in this year, pretty steady. Let's see if we can go back to 23. 23, we had May here, inventory's climbing June, climbing July, climbing August, climbing September, climbing October, climbing November, and dropping off in December like we've seen pretty much every year. Now, once again, this is coming out of those interest rates hikes, so don't want to put too much weight on that. Now we have May going down here once again, but let's go back to 2019, right? So you see May here is 9,421 homes, and that is the peak, right? And then we're seeing homes start to drop off as not as many people actively listing their property. And then once again, we get down to December and we're at a valley again. So this right here, 2024, is more similar to 2019. So go back to 2018, and it doesn't exactly follow what we're talking about. So May, 8,411, and it's climbing, 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 climbing. And then November, October, we see the drop off, right? So what the good news is, and this isn't the only stat I want to talk about here, and let me know if you have any comments below or questions about what I'm covering here. The good news is that it seems to be a pattern, right, that we can look at. And is inventory done with the historic climbs that we've been seeing here in St. Augustine? We've recognized, and there's plenty of news stories out there, that sellers are starting to delist their homes, right? So they're not getting the price they want. They're saying, you know what, I'm not going to sell it. I'm just going to rent it to somebody, or just take it off the market and live in it, whatever they're looking to do. Maybe they're not making that move that they wanted to make. But either way, we're seeing people delisting their properties, taking them off the market. And what does that mean for our market here? Well, as of right now, I don't think there's anything to worry about, right? We're heading into the end of the year. Things are slowing down. So we typically, through historical patterns, don't see a huge swing in changing of pricing or anything as we go towards the end of the year. But the one thing I do want to consider is like, okay, are we at the peak of how many homes are going to come back on the market? And if interest rates do go down, which we're going to cover here in a bit because they have taken a pretty sharp decline here, and they have some PPI reports that just came out today. CPI reports are coming out tomorrow. And then the Fed is also meeting on what they're going to do. And if inflation stays in line with what people think it's going to do, then that could mean a larger basis points drop than most people were expecting, which is 25 basis point, a quarter point. Potentially, it could be a half a point. Which then, are we going to be at the beginning of the new cycle of real estate, right? We've been in a down market in real estate since 2022 in reality, and that's across the nation, right? Last year was the lowest amount of home sales since the great financial crisis. Right? So we didn't see a crash in pricing, but we saw a crash in transactions. So if interest rates start coming to a point like we're in the high fives, right? And some people are getting quoted in the high fives, how much opportunity, how many buyers does that unlock for the market? And does that mean we're going to be on another path to prices increasing like we saw years ago? So what I want to do is pull up this, we'll pull up two real quick, because this is across all of northeastern Florida. But my point is that real estate's cyclical, and typically it goes in patterns of, hey, we're going to have appreciation time, and we're also going to have slower times. Typically prices could go down, right? But from what we've seen since 2022, not much has changed, right? 2022 median sale price in all of northeastern Florida was $375,000. Median sale price right now is $368,000. So really not much of a change. Our market's been moving sideways, and that's reflective all across the area. And I mostly cover St. Johns County, but this gives you a bigger picture of what's happening here in northeastern Florida. So, and this is going to tie into one of our news stories here in a bit, but what I wanted to do is take a look at months of supply. Now this is typically not a metric that a lot of consumers know of, but this is what a lot of realtors say. So months of supply of inventory is the number of months it would take to sell through the available inventory at the current sales rate. So right here is kind of, I believe what this blue chart is kind of showing you what's a seller's market and what's a balanced market and what's a buyer's market. This blue chart is the balanced market, right? So there's kind of negligible difference between the leverage a buyer has or the leverage a seller has. Now here down in 2021, 2022, the sellers had all the leverage, right? There wasn't any homes available, right? So at one point it took 1.2 months for us to sell out of all the inventory available in our market. Now we're at 5.2, which is very similar to that 2019 year. We're just on January, right? So a little bit slower term of a sales cycle. So we're going to go back to May. Boop, 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 or where we're at. Sorry, this is August. What am I talking about? I'm confusing the two things. We're going back to August. We're at 3.3 months. So definitely still a different market than then, where it's taking longer to sell a home. There's no doubt about that. So this is what I was really looking at earlier, and then I was like, let me check active inventory and just see what the pattern is. And that's just one thing that we've been seeing, these meteoric rises in terms of inventory, right? And in reality, it it was expected and wanted, because down here was not a fun time for me. As I was a buyer's agent on a real estate team during this time, it sucked. It was not fun. If you were a seller and listing a home, it was great. If you were a listing agent, it was great because you listed a property, you made 3% of a $500,000 house, and you sold it in 3 or 4 days. It took literally no work to make a ton of money. But now it's not the case, right? You got to work a little bit harder to make these things happen. But what I was interested in is seeing that active listings have started to trend downward, and it seemed to trend downwards earlier than what we've seen over the past couple years, where we're expecting more inventory from a pandemic. And I wasn't even sharing my screen there. Sorry. It started to trend downwards here, as in listings aren't coming on the market, and that could be because of the market, how slow things are, but it could also be because other factors, who knows. But it more or less replicated what's going on over here versus what's happened over here, where we're really recovering from the low inventory we had during the pandemic. I'm obviously not a micro or macroeconomics professor here, but I think anyone could recognize trends and patterns and kind of make a conclusion. What's your conclusion on that? I know I talked about a lot here in terms of months of supply, active inventory, but it is interesting to see, right? Because active inventory is starting to go down, right? And this could be the perfect storm where the Fed's talking about cutting rates, mortgage rates have already kind of fallen off a cliff. Well, falling off a cliff is relative, right? To where we were, right? If they were at 3%, that'd be falling off a mountain, right? But falling off a cliff and landing on the cliff right below you at 6 and a third point isn't so bad. So let's just quickly take a look at mortgage rates. This is, we'll just go to the home page, Mortgage News Daily. This is like one of my favorite places to go. I like their calculator that they have on here. It's not, no frills, right? It's not anything special, but very easy to use. But you can see 30-year rate for a 30-year rate for fixed mortgages is 6.29%, which just a couple weeks ago we were at 6.7. Just maybe a week and a half ago we were at 6.5. So why is that going down? Now, I'm going to cover a whole bunch of news stories here, but if you haven't seen the jobs report, okay. So job growth over the past year, oh my God, New York Times, unbelievable. You can read it, okay. U.S. economy added 911,000 fewer jobs than previous reported. Job growth revised down by nearly 1 million, updated BLS data shows. Now, that's something that is really interesting because that's one of the things that the Fed is going to look at in terms of changing interest rates. So, typically, the market interest rates are going to look at what's happening in the economy and make decisions prior to the Fed making any decisions, right? So, I think what we've seen in terms of interest rates coming to 6.3, we're going to be in the ballpark of that. Even if the Fed decides, hey, we're going to lower basis points by 50 bips, I think we're still going to be in the 6.3. The market is pricing in what they think is probably going to happen here in the future. So that's a good thing overall, even though you really got to wonder, man, if I was 1 million jobs off, I feel like someone should be fired, right? In today's world with all the technology that we have, how are we over-reporting 1 million jobs? That is insanity to me. That's a huge amount. So how does that happen, right? It's over the past year, so you could say, oh, it's Trump's fault. It's on both of them, right? They're both president at the time. Happened over a year's time. So it's not a political thing. It's just it is a political thing. It's a government thing not doing its job correctly, not being accurate at all. Because at the end of the day, the market is looking at the jobs report and they're making decisions on what they want to do. Investors are making decisions on how they want to place their money based on these jobs reports. And come to find out that it's 1 million jobs off, right? What's going on there? How can we rely on this data, right? And I don't know. It's very frustrating to me. You guys have seen me here before. I question the MLS data, right? And I've even thought about taking the data that I see online and pulling it and making a separate spreadsheet. But, I got bigger fish to fry. It's a lot of work at that point, and it could just be for nothing. So, if you guys have any questions about that, I know I just covered a lot, talked about a whole bunch of different things. Let me know in the comments below. I'll come back and answer them. Let's go on to the next news stories here. We're going to tie a couple of these things into each other, so let's go ahead. All right, where are we at? I think we're right here. Okay, mortgage demand jumps to the highest level in 3 years as interest rates drop sharply. The average contract interest rate for a 30-year mortgage rate with conforming loan balances 800,000 or less decreased to 6.49% from 6.64% to 6.49%. Applications to refinance a home jumped 12% for the week and were 34% higher than the same week 1 year ago. Applications for a mortgage to purchase a home rose 7% for the week and were 23% higher than the same week 1 year ago. And I'd have to double check this, but I'm almost positive that interest rates at this time last year were actually higher than they are right now. So there's a lot of things to unpack with that, but what I will say is that people have been kind of worried. They look at the interest rate, they look at the payment, they look at the economy over the past couple of years, and it's made people worried. Now there's a million jobs less, makes people worried, right? But the one thing you can say is that since 2022, there has been a bit of pent-up demand. There's people that want to buy homes that have been in this group that are like, hey, I don't know what's going on in the world. There's all these wars, there's tariffs, there's new president, there's this, there's that, there's interest rates climbing, the market. Every time you read about Florida online, it's about Florida and how crazy our housing market is, or insurance or whatever. But it's interesting to see because now once interest rates just go down a little bit, there's people that are like, okay, this is probably my time to hop in, right? And if you've been watching the show for a while, we always talk about seasonality. And here in our market, really September and October is going to be kind of the bottom of the market every year, right? And then once we get to November, December, we get a snowbird pop. And then once we get through the, essentially the winter here, which is not really winter, we get to the March, springtime through summer. It's summer selling season, right? So a lot of the real estate agents, and I'm not saying that I'm one of these people, but a lot of the real estate agents are out here saying that this is the time to buy before the next real estate cycle happens, where prices start appreciating in the same way. Not the same way as the pandemic, but prior to the pandemic, a more of a normal rate, like maybe 3 to 5% a year, right? A lot of agents are saying that. A lot of macro and microeconomics professors are saying that. All the data people are saying that. And 100%, there's a million factors that go into it. That is one way to look at it, right? But I do know every single year, September, October, it's kind of dead. So you kind of get pretty much what you want. You have your choice of houses, but also every seller is kind of competing for your business too. So either way, let's go on to the next. Ooh, it looks like we got some comments here. Mary Lou Twomey, she was fired. Phony job numbers to make Biden economy look good. Her name is Erica McIntarfer, head of Bureau of Labor Statistics. Yeah, I don't know if she was actually fired, Mary Lou. I know that Trump said that he was going to fire her, but then I didn't follow through on the news story, but I did see that he said, hey, I'm firing this person, but I don't know if he actually has the legal authority to fire this person. If he's like, no one knows how this stuff works, right? But that's apparently what I've seen recently. I'm not sure if it's confirmed that she's fired. And the other thing with that is, I don't know who any of these people are. I couldn't tell you what their credentials are, right? But more than likely, this is the head of the Bureau of Labor Statistics, right? So you'd think you cut the head off, you stop the problem. But at the end of the day, if you're the head of the BLS, like, all you're probably doing is a reporting figure and a talking head. So like you're flown out to all these different places to take the numbers that your people give you and then just say, hey, these are the numbers that my people gave me, right? So maybe he fired one person, maybe he didn't, but at the end of the day, it seems to be a bigger issue with how they're looking at reporting, right? And that's just my 2 cents on it. I'm a realtor in St. Augustine. I don't know anything about politics, right? So yeah, but all of us, I think that's not a fair thing to say because I think a lot of people think like you need to be extremely intelligent to be a politician. From everything I've seen over these past couple of years, you don't. You 100% don't. Any Joe Schmo can be a politician as long as you know how to speak in front of people. I think you'll be good. But either way, outside looking in, it does seem a little fishy, Mary Lou. But I think at that point we need to really evaluate how they're looking at the jobs being created and what do they count as jobs being created, right? Like, because I'm just guessing just by your comments, right? Phony job numbers to make Biden economy look good, right? Now, I could agree with you because during that time and I'm probably a part of the generation affected the most by this because a lot of my generation can't get good jobs. During that time, right, we're hearing about all these, oh yeah, all these jobs are posted, but they're gig jobs, right? So it's like someone who's got a part-time job, or they got a full-time job, but they're also working Uber because they can't afford to pay anything, right? So it's like additional jobs on top of their full-time job. So it's not like, I guess that you could consider that a job added, but I don't know, kind of phony reporting, right? But let me know what you guys think in the comments below. We got Pete Goodman here. Thomas, seems like a good time to buy since you could always refinance if the rates come down. Yeah, and I said that once, right? I said, this is like a big realtor line. I don't know, salespeople. I don't consider myself a salesperson. You guys ready to buy a house? I'm here to help you, right? You ready to sell a house? I'm here to help you. I'm not forcing anyone to do anything. I just put out information, right? But people say marry the rate. Wait, no, date the rate, marry the house, right? So find the house you love, date the rate, because if interest rates go down, well, then you can refinance then, right? Well, that's a dangerous thing to say when it could take years for that to happen, right? What we're seeing here, 6.3% interest rates, we actually saw in March, right? I think it was March. They dropped to 6.3 for like a weekend, it felt. It was like, but we did see activity jump, right? So maybe once the Fed or the CPI report comes out tomorrow, we see interest rates jump back up. Let's take a look tomorrow. We'll recap next week and see what happens. But I do agree that this is the best time of the year to buy, and you could always refinance. And I took that advice, right? Like I have a 7% interest rate. Interest rates go down to like 5.5%. I'm refinancing, right? And that was my goal. I love my little house that I got. I love the location that I'm in, but it doesn't mean that like this is my forever home, right? So I agree with you on that, Pete. It is solid advice, but you also need to be able to weather that storm, right? So if it's 3 years at a 7% interest rate, you're stuck at a 7% interest rate making that payment. You need to be comfortable with that, right? So appreciate you commenting here, Pete. If you're looking to buy, man, let me know. We can make it happen. We got Kevin here. Sorry, my dog's whining to get it. I let him in, he'll whine to get in, and then I'll let him in, and he'll whine to get out, and then I'll be up and down all day, so he might hear him whining. How is the eminent domain of the homes to alleviate the flooding of Lake Sanchez coming along? Kevin, I don't know. I haven't heard much about that since it came out. I know that the homeowners are fighting against that. It's an interesting point, right? Like I'm very much not. I'm very much for property rights, right? But then you look at like, okay, hey, there's 2 homeowners affected. And I don't know all the nitty gritty details about this, but let's say they own a home, 2 homes, and let's say the 2 homes. Let's just use. I only got the screen here. These are the 2 homes, right? They're right here and right here, and they own their property. It goes all the way over here, but the city wants this part so that they can put a wall in, and the wall is going to help all the homeowners in the area when it comes down to flooding. Is that the right thing to do? They still get to keep their houses, but they lose their land. Greater good. Taking away someone's property. God, it's hard. It's hard. I really stance on it, I would say, especially for the long term of that community, because anyway you swing it, in a way, we're kind of all renters, right? Like, yeah, I might buy this house, might be able to get the profit from it when I sell it, but at the end of the day, I'm always paying property taxes, right? So I'm always paying the city or the St. Johns County property taxes. So what's the benefit for St. Johns County, the city of St. Augustine, long term, right? Probably to put that wall up. Hard to say, right? But Kevin, appreciate you. Pete Goodman, we got you on here. We'll definitely let you know how was the rental market. How was the rental market? Are the prices? Okay, wait. Higher than normal because people can't afford homes. So our rental market here, I think, is kind of softened a bit. And once again, I don't deal with rentals. I literally don't. It's not my forte. It's not my cup of tea. And in Florida in general, I used to do real estate in New York. In New York, it was very typical. If you wanted to rent an apartment, you'd hook up with me and we'd go see an apartment, and whatever the monthly rent of that apartment was my fee. And that was a fee paid by the tenant, right? Not by the landlord. It's paid by the tenant. So here in Florida, it's not that way at all. Typically, Anywhere else, that's how it is. But here in Florida, it's a property manager's game. So like, if there's any compensation offered, there's only like $100, right? So it's really not a realtor's game. And outside of that, a lot of the landlords are sellers, right? So they're not even using a property management company. They're just managing it themselves, and they're, direct to consumer essentially. So I will say that the rental market is, I think, guided more or less around the school years, right? Especially surrounding downtown St. Augustine, because you have people that are going to Flagler, right? And then you also have people that are just working in the hospitality industry that are around my age, right? Those are typically going to be your bucket of renters. Now, of course, there's small families and all that kind of stuff that want to rent as well. But all those, if you typically have a family, you're more than likely trying to buy. So I would say that the rental market is typically softer around this time of the year, and then it'll be a little bit of pop towards the end of the year just because you have semesters changing. But summer is going to be probably the hottest time as well. So I don't have all the information on that, but you could say just people, with this thought here, and it's a very good thought, Peter. I like this, Pete. Sorry. If homes are unaffordable here, but renting is cheaper, which it is, 100% all day long, then that should put upward pressure on pricing of rentals, right? Now, what I do know aside from that, that is a 100% probably true statement, but they are building rentals left and right in St. Johns County, all on State Road 16. They're in the process of building and completed at least 3 major apartment complexes on 16. One on the other side of 16, on the other side of 95, on 16 on the other side of 95. 4 actually. One right by where the old outlet mall was, the indoor portion of the outlet mall. They built all apartments over there. They also built one right next to, like in between where Culver's is and Chick-fil-A. There's another space there, kind of off Inman Road. And they built another they're building another complex, which I think is a 4 or 3-story complex, off of 4 Mile and 16. So they're building them, and I think they're building them on 16 strategic advantage, just because one, that was going to be developed eventually. You see 210 develop, which is the east and west on the northern part of county. We've seen the International Golf Parkway develop, and now we're starting to see 16 develop. And with being so close to 95, you can get to Jacksonville in like 20 minutes, 25 minutes, right? So it makes it attractive to a lot of people who are like, hey, maybe I want to work in downtown St. Augustine, but maybe I want to work in Jacksonville and go get a higher paying job. So those aren't all completed. We will see what happens here in the future, but I think that's probably the goal with that, right, is to soften the rental prices here, because a 2-bedroom apartment in our area is like $1,600-$1,700 at the cheapest, So, and for many people watching this, and Pete, I'm sure you're included, you're like, $1,700, that ain't shit, right? But here in St. Augustine, that's a lot of money, right? So it's just what it is, right? Different strokes, different folks. We got Kevin. All right, Kevin, after this one, or anyone else watching, any questions, I'm going to go back to the news stories. I will answer your questions, but just want to keep the flow going. Kevin, thanks for that. Another question, if I could. Have you seen any combining of 2 lots into one? Speaking like the homes on Washington Street that are small. Have you seen any combining of 2 lots into one? I mean, yeah, it's definitely possible. I mean, I imagine that just to give you an example, I bought a house here, right, in West Augustine. There's a lot behind me. It's a vacant lot that I'm thinking about purchasing, right? The owner apparently lives right around the corner. Found that on the property tax records. And I'm thinking about just offering him, as cheap as I can. If I could offer him $5,000, he'll take it. I'll pay that, right? Because really the land is kind of, there's a road that goes back there, but the utilities aren't there. Like, it's just, it's undeveloped land, and there's a railroad track back there too. So not exactly the most attractive land. But for me, it's like, hey, I don't want anyone buying it and put a house back there, because then I got to deal with neighbors back there, which I don't want. So, but for me, it's like, if I were to do that, I would just keep it separate, because then I can operate. So this is my plan, and I'll give you my plan, right? I figure, because I don't have a garage, I got the lot back there. If I can put a 2-car garage with an efficiency on there, my mother-in-law can stay over there, right? I don't have to stay in my house, stay over there. Stay on top of the garage. But then maybe if I wanted to in the future, because the goal is for this property to eventually be a short-term rental, to maybe add like one, you have the other efficiency back. You have that one apartment back there. Put my studio over there too, so I'm not in my house. Maybe another room for a kid opposed to my studio, so I put the studio back there. So I have a 2-car garage, I have my studio, and then I have a little apartment I can rent out. Now, I'd also thought about maybe adding a pool or something. Then it makes it this whole Airbnb experience, like, hey, you have access to this pool, I can rent out this property, I can rent out that property. So I would keep it separate for this reason. If you have 2 dwellings on one parcel and it's zoned single family, you can only rent that out to one person, right? So let's say if you were to buy a place, if you're living there, you can rent it out to whoever you want, right? But if you were to move out and you were to try to rent out both simultaneously with being on one lot with single family zoning, then you would not be allowed to technically by what the county allows here. It'd have to be multifamily zoning. So you'd want to keep them separated, and then you could still sell them as a package together, right? Just keep them separated. That's my 2 cents. However you want to do it, of course. It's definitely possible to conjoin them, but is it worth it? I would probably say no. It's probably going to be better for you in the long run not to have them conjoined. Pete, thank you, my man. Kevin, Pete, you guys. Wait, I know we got one more. Mary Lou, Kevin, Pete, appreciate you guys. We're going to go on to the next news story here. I'm going to fly through these next couple ones. We dove into some deep stuff there. Okay, now I'm a part of the Business Journal. You can see my account right here, but I guess I don't have access to South Florida. South Florida has most unbalanced housing market in country, new report says. So it doesn't give me much information because it says I have to upgrade, which is stupid. The latest numbers suggest it would take the better part of a year to sell all the homes listed in the Tri-County region at the current sales pace. So if you guys remember what I was talking about in the month's supply of inventory, that's what they're saying, right? So South Florida is taking the better part of a year, whereas in North Florida, Northeast Florida in particular, we're taking the better part of half a year, right? So I think that's something that we really need to put in perspective, because I deal with it all day long. People talking about the market and how bad the market is, because all we see on the news is how bad Florida is. Insurance is terrible, hurricanes, this, that, right? And it's like, okay, well, in our area, it's not necessarily the same, right? South Florida is way different than North Florida. The pricing in South Florida is way different than North Florida. They get hit with more hurricanes, more intense hurricanes, and their insurance is way more expensive. Just having a conversation with one of my clients today who's putting his townhome on the market about insurance, and the average insurance premium in the state of Florida is between $4,000 and $6,000 a year, homeowners insurance, right? That's a huge bit. The average that I see in northeastern Florida, and this is of course from me working with a whole bunch of clients all over the areas, is around $2,000 to $2,500 a year, right? So we are much cheaper than living in the entire state of Florida, right? So my point with that is, like, if the average is between 4 and 6, and then our average up here is around 2,500, then the skew is South Florida is probably closer to 8 or 10, right? Because it's just got to make that average, that difference. Jacksonville is the most populous city in all of the state of Florida, has the most people living in Jacksonville. So we have a good bit of the population here. Really interesting for me to think about that, because people, the market is local. It's not the whole state is on fire and everything's going bad. It's the local market, right, of South Florida that's really contributing to that. So, oh man, I should have brought a drink in here. I've been on a Coke Zero kick. I actually think I like them better than regular Cokes. I've been addicted to Coca-Cola. I almost said addicted to Coke since I was like 10. So it's been a habit I've been trying to kick for a while, and Coke Zero is doing the job. I gotta say, I think I like it more. Either way, on the next news story here, guys. All right, so we covered that. We covered this. Now this is something that I hate articles written like this, but here it is. Florida cities and counties line up to defy new pro-developer state law. SB 180 ties their hands, so they're up in arms, ready to sue and urging a repeal. So I saw this, and I'm not familiar with this publication or anything, but how they start this is just me, I hate bullshit, right? So, like a lot of you, I'm a sucker for movies about scrappy underdogs. Like, you lost me right there. Just get to the information. Like, come on, let's do it. So let's see. I think I have it down here. So most of the bill talks about helping victims of Hurricane Helene and Milton. But it also contains a section that says no local government is allowed to pass any new local land use or development regulations that could be considered more restrictive or burdensome than what was already on the books, and that part isn't tied to any emergency. Now, I could totally agree with that, and the one thing I will say is, like, politicians suck, right? And anyone can be a politician. If you have a good heart, you should go out and do it, because this is silly. They put out all these bills and they're like, hey, we got this big bill, right? You take the big beautiful bill. I'm sure that I haven't read it, but I'm sure there's millions of things in there that could have been a million separate bills, and we should have voted on each one of them individually. Instead, they're like, let's package it into a shit sandwich and sell the shit sandwich. So there's some good things part of the shit sandwich, there's some bad things about the shit sandwich. Let's just sell the shit sandwich. And that's one of those things, right? It's like, hey, we want to give hurricane relief to the hurricane victims, but also on top of that, we want to restrict local governments. Like, so, hey, if you don't vote for this, you're not for helping hurricane victims, you know? And it's like, these guys, right? Like, who gave them their jobs? But that's just my perspective on it. I don't know much about SB 180. I'll look into it and see what more it has to say. This article does seem like it's trying to be like a little confrontational, a little punchy, you know? And not a big fan of that, but either way, I do sympathize with what they're saying. If they would have just came to it at more of like direct conclusion opposed to citing an underdog scrappy movie Rocky tone to it. But either way, guys, let's go on to the next news story here. Any questions about what we're talking about, let me know. And if you're familiar with St. Augustine and what's going on with our weather here, we're in the peak of hurricane season, and we don't have any major hurricanes on the horizon. So this is typically when we see a lot of the hurricane activity. Typically goes through November, but September is normally the busiest. Now, whenever we see flooding or any issues in St. Augustine, it's always around king tide. And that's when it's the highest point of coastal tide. So, if you've gone through downtown, and this is probably playing from an old, let me refresh this, they'll have videos here. Oh my gosh. But downtown is always going to be flooded. It's been raining like crazy these past couple weeks. Oh my gosh. Every single day it's been dumping rain.
And our team coverage.
Downtown St. Augustine.
That's right, Keith. And now, right now, those students, some other people in cars or bikes are trying to figure how are they going to cross Bridge Street. And this is downtown St. Augustine, just probably a couple blocks away from campus. And this is what is left even after high tide that hit in this.
So, I mean, that obviously explains it right there. It's downtown St. Augustine. It just celebrated its 460th birthday, right? 460 years ago, when the Spanish started developing St. Augustine, they didn't really think about stormwater management and all that good stuff. And St. Augustine doesn't have that, right? So it rains good for an hour. There's flooding up to your ankles in a lot of parts of St. Augustine, in downtown St. Augustine especially. So, you know, this ties into, someone asked me about the eminent domain with the two properties there. Now, this isn't from the tide coming up and it flooding the area. This is just from rain, right? This is not from the king tide being at the highest point and then flooding. It's just rain, right? So whenever we have a hurricane and king tide and a whole bunch of rain, it floods like crazy in downtown. That's when you'll see water breaching the seawall. So that's where it's like, you see that downtown consistently, and then they talk about doing some flood mitigation where they happen to have to buy two properties in order to do that and take away those properties from those property owners. Kind of makes a little bit of sense, right? Because they do have a lot of problems with flooding in downtown. It doesn't even need to be a major storm to do it. So either way, guys, any questions, let me know. We're going to go on to the next news story. But that is something, especially if you're considering living in downtown St. Augustine, I think that's important. Popular St. Augustine restaurant Hurricane Patty's forced to shut down as marina eyes sales. So if you haven't been over here, it's kind of a staple, honestly, in St. Augustine. I'm really sad that it is getting closed down because, I mean, I remember seeing Hurricane Patty's when I was going on the bus as a kid, you know, and it's just your standard, like, small town, like, it's on the intercoastal like boat bar, like, very cool. It's nothing fancy, but it's a great place either way. But they will close on November 23rd. River's Edge Marina won't extend the restaurant lease because they're thinking about selling it. Owner Jeffrey Miles is still looking for a new location. So I literally can't even tell you how long this place has been open, but I want to say 40 years. But I think they're eyeing up $14 million for the sale of this place. And, the hard thing is like, I can tell the owner's a little bit upset because he bought it in 2021. But yeah, it's on LoopNet for $14 million. So if you guys are looking to buy a marina with a restaurant, this is probably going to be a good place to look. But the thing is like he's saying like, hey, they don't want to renew our lease because it's going to affect the sale. And that's right. I mean, people that all the time. Like I just had the listing I have coming up this weekend in St. Augustine Beach, a townhome. They had a tenant in until like the past month, right? So because of that, if they were to try to sell it, anyone that would have to buy it would have to be okay with the market rent that they're getting. And these people bought the townhome years ago, so like it was making cash flow sense for them. But anyone who buys it at today's market rate has to buy it, let's say around $350,000 and collect $2,000 a month in rent. The math doesn't math for any investor, right? So anyone looking to buy it would have to be willing to wait until that tenant's lease runs out. So the only thing that correlates to is the seller taking less money for it. So that's one of the things is like it's an unfortunate reality for the owners there. But if they're trying to get top dollar for that marina, having a restaurant that has a lease and that lease is probably pretty favorable because they negotiated with the old owners isn't exactly ideal, because anyone that buys that marina is probably going to want to reinvest and put a ton of money into that restaurant and the marina as well. So it is sad. It looks like they are looking for another location. Hopefully they can get back on the Intercoastal and find a good spot for them. But that's property rights, right? Like, hey, you own the marina, you want to sell it, it's within your right. So on to the next news story, guys. I got 2 more, so any questions, let me know. This one's a quick one. 26,000 square foot warehouse to rise along St. John's I-95 corridor. So the warehouse district along Interstate 95 corridor, St. John's County, which I believe they're talking about off of International Park Drive. They're going to be putting a 30,000, or they have a 30,000 square foot one. They're putting a 26,000 square foot one right next to it. It's also going to be office space. $2.8 million permit. That's going up. It does seem that this type of warehousing is coming to St. Johns County, and maybe that is in result of the transloading facilities that Jacksonville's really invested in being a major hub for the ships to come in to Jacksonville opposed to Miami. So they started dredging the canals. They can now accept like the Chinese mega shipping ships they have, because the canals are now deep enough to do it. So I wonder if those, I imagine they have to tie in some type of way together. Why we're seeing all these warehouses pop up over northeastern Florida. So, guys, any questions, throw them in the comments below. We got one more news story. We're 42 minutes deep in this one. I normally don't go this late, but this one's an interesting one, and it happened in a neighborhood that you would not, it's just outside like the core of the neighborhood, but still would not suspect this. St. Johns County deputies shoot, kill man holding gun after neighbor reported suspicious person. So this is in St. Augustine South. So if you're not familiar, it's one of my favorite neighborhoods in St. Johns County, on the corner of, I think, Bernard Street and 2nd Street is what they said. And this is in the early morning hours. This is at, some St. Augustine neighbor reported seeing a man that she had an altercation with earlier in the day at 5:40 a.m. in her backyard. She called the police. 2 officers arrived on scene. The guy wasn't complying. They're putting an investigation in, but they shot him. I don't know if he's dead or not. Did I say that? Did I say kill man? Yep, he's dead. So they're doing an investigation into it. Apparently he had some mental health issues on top of that. But they're doing it. They asked that's not the sheriff, but they asked the deputy there what happened. Like, hey, did he raise his gun at officers? And he was like, still an investigation ongoing. We'll let y'all know when we have more information. So very crazy for that to happen in for that to happen in St. Johns County is wild. I don't know if I've read the St. Johns County's deputies have shot and killed someone in my past. I've been doing this every week for over 3 years now. I don't know if I've ever read that. So that's very interesting anywhere in St. Johns County, but to have it in St. Augustine South is wild, because that's just not a place you'd suspect that. So, but mental health is a growing problem, as we probably can conclude, I mean, today in today's live stream, I'm sure all you guys saw that one guy, Charlie Kirk, was shot in the middle of him doing a speech. Wild. Oh my gosh, that's the wildest thing that's happened this year so far. He was obviously very controversial because he was very right-leaning and supporting of Trump. But makes you wonder, because from all I know of him is that he would go to colleges and debate kids, and like he'd easily win because they're kids. And like I was a stupid college kid once, right? They don't have any life experience to really know what's going on. So he would debate these kids and just roast them. But yeah, shot today. So mental health is a big problem. But awesome, guys. Listen, you guys have been awesome. Kevin, Pete, Mary Lou, appreciate you guys being here. We're here every Wednesday at 8 p.m. going to the market stats, news you know about, think about buying, selling, or investing here in northeastern Florida. And we're also doing a Q&A. So if you're rewatching this, and I'm not doing this live, leave your questions, your comments in the comments below. If you've got any value, subscribe to the channel. If you need to look at buy or sell here in northeastern Florida, reach out directly. There's pretty much a link in every single one of my videos. All my contact information is pretty much all over the internet. So appreciate you guys being here. I'll see you next Wednesday at 8.